Tonight, the U.S. Navy is fighting a military conflict you've probably never heard of. The island of Vieques near Puerto Rico has been under all-out assault. In fact, the Navy has been bombing Vieques for 50 years. Vieques is the only place the Atlantic Fleet launches full combat training with live ammunition. But after a tragic accident 6 months ago, the people of Puerto Rico have demanded an end to that training. Some are even standing as human shields on the target range. The result? The Navy says it's being forced to send men and women overseas without the training that could save their lives. Ironically, one of the obstacles that the Navy faces may be the Commander-in-Chief himself, President Clinton. Vieques lies just off Puerto Rico's east coast. It's home to a little over 9,000 American citizens, and it's just about as quiet a corner of the Caribbean as you can find, unless the landlord is in town. For the last 50 years, the U.S. Navy has used its range on Vieques as a canvas on which to practice the art of war. The Navy owns 2/3 of the island, much of it a buffer zone between the residents and the bomb range out on the eastern tip. This is the only place in the Atlantic where the Navy can practice an all-out assault, combining marine landings, naval gunfire, and airstrikes. Today, the USS Eisenhower Battle Group is steaming off the coast of Puerto Rico to train young sailors and Marines for combat. But instead, it has sailed into a crisis. 12 ships and 70 planes are primed for an intricate war game. But the men and women of the Eisenhower cannot pull the trigger, and if Puerto Rico gets its way, they never will.
When we say that the people of Puerto Rico will not allow this, I mean it.
Pedro Rosello is governor of Puerto Rico.
I think that if this were happening in Manhattan, another island, or if it were happening in Martha's Vineyard, certainly the delegation from those states would make certain that this would not continue.
You're saying the Navy cannot drop one more bomb on that island?
No, unless they're willing to bomb Martha's Vineyard.
Take Vieques off the map. It's gone. Where does that leave the Navy?
That leaves us in a deep, deep hole for readiness.
Vice Admiral William Fallon is in command of the Atlantic Fleet.
It's about combat risk. The reason we do this live fire training is because we need to prepare our people for this potential, this eventuality. If we don't do it, then we put them at very, very direct risk. And this is the problem at Vieques. That's why this place is so important to the Navy and the nation.
But the islanders say they are the ones who are at risk, and Puerto Rico has been in open revolt since one tragic mistake 6 months ago. Last April, a young Marine pilot fresh out of training was trying to drop 2 500-pound bombs on the live fire range. It was twilight and cloudy, and the fuel indicator in the cockpit showed him that he was all out of time. He thought he found his target, but instead he zeroed in on this observation post about a mile away. David Sanis, a civilian security guard, was standing near this spot when both bombs exploded. The death of David Sanis was the moment that crystallized the revolt. He was the first civilian to die in 50 years of training at Vieques, but his death released emotions that had been building for years. Suddenly, the resentment spilled out onto the bomb range itself. Hundreds of Puerto Ricans invaded the target area, and many are still there today, dug into the beach as human shields. Senator, we are standing on U.S. Navy property. You're trespassing.
We're standing on Puerto Rican property.
One of the protesters on the range is Ruben Berrios, a Puerto Rican senator who advocates independence from the United States. He says Navy ownership of Vieques is immoral. It's argued in Washington that to protect human rights around the world, you have to have a strong military. And you can't have a strong military if they don't have a chance to practice.
Well, that's a lot of bullshit, like you Americans say. There is an outdated facility, and they can do the things they're doing here in many other places.
How long have you been here?
I've been here for almost 5 months now.
How long are you going to stay?
As long as it is necessary. I'll stay here until the Navy says it's going to leave and it's not going to bombard anymore, or until they arrest me.
That anger with the Navy has been rising for decades. The islanders say the war games have seriously harmed the environment and their health. Puerto Rico commissioned an environmental study and hired explosives experts Rick Stauber and James Barton to survey the damage from explosive ordnance.
Do you think you found everything? Certainly not. Didn't have time to find everything, but we found a considerable amount of ordnance.
Barton took us on a tour of Navy bombs lying on the bottom, many of them still set to explode. This is a 500-pound bomb dropped from a plane.
Jim, this is still a bomb. The high explosive is still inside. That's affirmative, Scott. This bomb is in position to do quite a bit of damage to anybody that was to initiate it. This bomb can detonate. This bomb could detonate.
Up on shore, the Navy disposes of unexploded ordnance like this twice a year. But under the sea, the bombs eventually rot away, and the high explosive they contain is a suspected carcinogen.
This was once a live bomb where it was filled with explosive. At this point, the explosive is all gone.
Barton found that outside the bomb range, ordnance like this has fallen in civilian waters.
So this is a mistake we're looking at. That is correct. It's one of several mistakes I found outside the authorized impact zone off the southern coast of Vieques Island.
That's approximately 61 feet.
On shore, Rick Stauber showed us a reef of artillery shells.
This beach is made out of shell cases.
Basically, in fact, that's what has happened. Looks like they've dumped it over a period of years, and it's just bulldozed dirt over on top of it. And you can see the underlying...
Because of all of this, the Environmental Protection Agency is warning the Navy that it's in violation of clean water laws.
Do you figure that they thought nobody was ever going to look in this little cove?
I would have to assume that. I'm sort of amazed that it's still here over this length of time. This is right here is a sore thumb.
We saw a reef of artillery shells that had been dumped into an environmentally sensitive bay. I mean, that is reckless disregard for the environment.
I don't know what you saw or where you saw it. There has certainly been some ordnance that has ended up in the water in years past. The fact remains that this is an ordnance range. The reason there's so much land down there that's in Navy hands is precisely to keep it away from the civilian population.
But Puerto Rico insists that civilians are suffering. It claims that the cancer rate here is unusually high. And just this month, the federal government agreed to launch a study of the health effects.
5, 7, 4, 6, 0, 0, 6, 0, 1, 0.
100 miles off Vieques, the standoff means that the Eisenhower Battle Group may become the first U.S. Armada in the Atlantic to go overseas without live fire training. The problem is not academic. The Eisenhower already has orders to steam to the Persian Gulf in a few months, where its squadrons will fly combat air patrol over Iraq. One of those pilots is Lieutenant Commander Tony Ludovici. He's about to launch his F-14 Tomcat on a training mission that he will not be allowed to complete. We went along to understand the problem from the cockpit.
Okay, we're next. Best ride of your life right here. Here we go.
The catapult yanks the F-14 off the deck in just over 1 second, from 0 to 150 miles an hour by the time the wheels leave the ship. Ludovici's mission is to bomb a simulated surface-to-air missile site on Vieques, exactly the kind of strike he will face in Iraq. On the way to the island, he practices defending himself from a missile attack. Ludovici slams the Tomcat into a 6G climb, 6 times the force of gravity. For the air crews, just getting to the target is hard, dangerous work. But as Vieques comes into view, this is the moment the real challenge is supposed to begin. Normally, Ludovici would dive for the target with live bombs on his wings and live Marines landing on the beach. No room for error.
It ups the ante a little bit more. Gets the heart rate, the adrenaline going.
Why is dropping real live ordnance all that important? You still acquire the target, you still shoot in that direction.
We get to become proficient and validate our procedures and our tactics from the time that we bring that weapon out of the magazine back at the ship to the time that it hits the target.
More like combat.
That's correct. It more closely simulates combat, and the closer you can simulate that combat, the more likely you'll perform your mission properly when you're called to.
Number 5-1, you can utilize Vieques 10,000 feet to...
But on this day, the F-14s train their sights on the Vieques target range and simply fly away.
That's like telling a baseball pitcher that before the game he's going to warm up, but he's going to go through the motions but not release the ball and see where his pitches are going.
Back on the carrier, Ludovici can only wonder whether the mission might have been a success.
We have some aviators in this squadron and in this air wing that have recently showed up, and they have not had the opportunity to go into a complex target environment with live bombs. And the first time they're probably going to have the opportunity to do that, since we can't do it down here during our Vieques training, is in combat.
During the Kosovo air campaign, it was clear that the nation expects from you accuracy, no collateral damage, no dead civilians.
No doubt about it, and we have the ability to get that accuracy, however it takes training.
Training that the Navy insists can only happen on Vieques. Why? The Navy says commercial traffic around the island is limited, and taxpayers have already invested billions of dollars on tracking stations and sensors that monitor the war games.
You're telling me there is not one place in the Atlantic Ocean that you can find to replace Vieques?
We have not found another place on the East Coast, and we have looked everywhere from Canada to Mexico and throughout the Caribbean, no place that is reasonable to replace it.
Now, it's up to the Commander-in-Chief to decide who wins the Battle of Vieques. In June, President Clinton appointed a commission to study the crisis. Unfortunately for the Navy, the President may not have waited for the results. Shortly after the commission was organized, Mr. Clinton received a letter protesting the Navy's presence on Vieques. He sent the letter to his national security advisor with this note attached. It reads, "I agree with this. This is wrong. I think they don't want us there. That's the main point. The Navy can find a way to work around it." Who wrote the letter that led the President to dismiss the Navy's concerns? It was Ruben Barrios, the Puerto Rican senator who's camped out on the bomb range.
You send the sons and daughters into combat. Can you do that in good conscience without Vieques?
I cannot. I don't know how to do that.
The Navy says it will return to these waters in December, and it must have Vieques back by then.
The people of Puerto Rico will not allow that. We will have people there in the bombing ranges, and if they arrest or remove some of them, there's going to be another wave.
Governor, you'll forgive me for this, but that almost sounded like a threat.
That's correct. It's not a threat, it's just reality.
Governor said if he has to put human shields on the beach, he'll do it. They feel passionately about this.
I know there is a tremendous amount of emotion. I'm responsible for training and preparing these young men and women in our services to go forward to face combat. My responsibility to the American people is to make sure that their sons and daughters are adequately trained. I can't do that right now.
The President's Commission on Vieques made its recommendation yesterday. It's proposing a 50% reduction in live-fire training and an end to the Navy presence in 5 years. But today, Puerto Rico's governor told Congress what he told us: no bombs, no compromise. The White House insists that despite his memo, Mr. Clinton has not made up his mind. But his wife has. The First Lady is thinking about running for the Senate in New York, where there are about 2 million people of Puerto Rican heritage. Mrs. Clinton is demanding an immediate and permanent end to the bombing of Vieques.